Hello and welcome back. This video is all about some of the weird and wonderful things you can do with filters in a modular synth setup. And this is the filter I'm going to be using, the brand new ADVA module which Plum Audio kindly sent over for me to check out. As you'll see, it has some pretty powerful features crammed in, but don't worry, most of the patch ideas in the video can be achieved using other modules too. So hopefully you'll get a few ideas for things to try no matter what gear you're using. Here's a quick taste of the patches coming up. ADVA is a mono analog multi-mode design that's available in black or silver and in both 3U and 1U formats. The 3U version, which is what I've got here, is just 6 HP wide, and although it might appear quite simple at first glance, there's actually quite a lot happening under the hood. It has 7 filter modes, 4 low pass, 2 band pass and a high pass, and you can use CV to switch between them. There's also CV control over the resonance. It has a built-in VCA, so when you pair it with an oscillator, all you really need is an envelope or two and you've got yourself a complete voice. There's a built-in noise generator which you can mix with the input and use to modulate the cutoff. There's a drive stage you can switch in on the input and a distortion stage that you can switch in on the output. It self-oscillates with the resonance up and then it'll track 1 volt per octave. ADVA uses the same special click knobs that Plum Audio use on their 1U Platts clone, Ed. Check out the video I did last year if you want to know more about that. They each have a main knob, a collar that moves independently, and you can push them to make selections. So they're basically 3 controls in one. They work really well in practice and they're a really elegant way of saving space without sacrificing usability. So the inputs and outputs are all at the bottom. We've got the audio input, a gain input, which is basically the VCA CV input. That's where you patch your volume envelope, and the audio output. Above these, we've got dedicated volt per octave CV input for the filter cutoff, and you can switch this to offer CV control over the filter mode if you prefer. The main FM input for the filter cutoff is in the middle, and there's a CV input for the resonance control on the right. Now this would probably be a good point to route some audio in so you can hear what the main controls do. So let me just pop a couple of other modules in this pod. Okay, I've just popped a couple of other things in this pod. I've got the Danny Sound EN129 oscillator, which is a nice straightforward analog oscillator that gives me a few different outputs. I've got an AI synthesis mult and attenuator, which will let me mult and attenuate some CV signals. And I've got the mutable instrument stages, which I'm going to use for some envelopes and some other bits of modulation, all fitting quite nicely into this pod. I've got the Arturia Keystep 37, which I'm going to use to control this overview. And I've got this scope on the output so we can see what's happening to the waveform. So let's kick us off with a saw wave to the input, and then I'll talk through what the 3 knobs do. The bottom one, the collar, the bottom part of the knob is the input level. Let's just bring that up. And the collar on the top knob is the output level. That becomes an attenuator for the VCA CV or the gain CV when you plug an envelope in. I'm just going to leave it droning for a second. The bottom knob mixes between the input and white noise. So fully clockwise it's just the internal noise source. 12 o'clock it's 50-50. Just see on the scope a bit of fuzz there, and fully counterclockwise it's just the input. The central knob is the filter cutoff, so probably the one you'll be using the most. And the ring around the central knob tells you what mode you're in and how open the filter is, so the green LEDs kind of correspond to the opening and closing. And at the moment I'm in the first low pass mode, the 6 dB per octave or 1 pole, and by pushing the middle knob you can jump between the modes. So this is the 12 dB, all with no resonance so far, 18 dB, and the 24 dB. Just the slightly sharper slope, and then there's the 12 dB bandpass and a 24 dB bandpass and a 12 dB high pass. I'm not going to do full sweeps at every resonance setting, but let's just have a quick listen to high pass with the resonance increasing, and then the 6 dB low pass. So you can hear as the resonance goes up, there's some gain compensation so it doesn't drop in level unlike lots of other filters, which is quite handy. And let's just keep it in the 18 dB or the 3-pole mode. See if the resonance up a little bit. And let's run a little sequence. Let's also take an envelope that's been triggered by that sequence. I'm going to go into the top of the mult. And let's take one copy into the gain. And let's take another copy into the filter FM. Before I do that, I should just say, with nothing in the filter FM input, when you turn up the filter FM on the collar on the central knob here, the noise is normal to it, so you get this kind of gritty. You can turn that off underneath if you don't want that noise. There's a little switch under the module. But as soon as you plug anything into that input, it'll override it anyway. So let's take that envelope. So we've got the same envelope now controlling the VCA gain and the filter. Now the two other things that I haven't mentioned yet are the push buttons on the top and bottom. The bottom one activates the drive circuit on the input, which is quite subtle, but kind of beefs up the input, especially with, it's more noticeable on some other kinds of waves than others. And the top one activates the distortion circuit on the output, which is much more noticeable. The top collar then becomes, you can kind of tame it a little bit, but it does really square off that wave quite a lot. When you add the resonance, there's some pretty aggressive tones here with both things on. Just take the drive off again. Bring in some noise. Just mixing in with the input there. That's with the drive still on. Take the drive off again. So there you go, that's the basic sound and the basic controls. So one cool thing to try with a multi-mode filter is switching the filter mode throughout the patch. There's a few different ways to do this depending on how your filter's set up. Some filters have individual outputs for the different low pass, band pass and high pass outputs. In that case, you could take those outputs into something like a sequential switch or a crossfader and then dynamically change between them in real time. But what ADVA has, which is kind of more unusual and pretty cool, is CV control over the filter mode. Basically, if you press the top and bottom buttons for a second, you'll see the MCV lights up, mode CV, and then this first CV input can take a CV signal which will select the filter mode between the different low pass, band pass and high pass modes. So I've set up a really simple patch. I'm going to use the BeatStep Pro to play in a little sequence, basically using the last two stages of stages as an attack decay envelope, which I'm multing to feed the VCA and the filter FM input. I'm taking the square wave output from the EM129 as my oscillator, and I'm using these first 4 channels of stages as a 4-step sequencer. And if I just start the sequence playing, I'm basically stepping once a bar between these 4 different levels here. And if I take the output into the CV input, so this first stage was the 1-pole low pass, second stage is 3-pole low pass, this 4th stage is high pass, and the 3rd stage is band pass 12. So you can see the mode changing as we go through. So it means every bar we're getting a different variation of the sound. If I bring the resonance up a bit. So that sounds pretty cool, especially with some drums added. Now another thing we can try, rather than switching once a bar, is switch it on every note. So if I take a copy of the gate that's triggering the envelope, which is basically the gate out of the melody sequence, let's set that into the sequencer advance. So basically on every new note it will move one stage along, and this gives us an even more dynamic kind of sound. So next up I'm going to take a look at filter pinging, which is where you take the resonance of a filter up to just below self-oscillation and then hit the input of the filter with a little burst of noise or a trigger or a very short snappy envelope rather than an audio signal, and then that kind of excites the filter and causes a little decaying sine wave, which is really good for kind of percussive sounds. It's good for making kick drums with a bit of extra modulation, and it's just a kind of quite a cool tone. So let's just have a listen. So the ADVA goes up to self-oscillation quite easily with the resonance at max. If I just back this off, and if I now hit a gate sequence into, I'm just using the last stage of stages as a very short snappy decay envelope, and I'm feeding that into the input of the filter. And you can hear this gate pattern now is making a nice little percussive, plucky kind of decaying sine wave. And by adjusting the resonance, you can kind of control the decay time. The lower the resonance, the shorter that decay, the more clicky it gets, until you can just hear the kind of click of the input really. And the longer it gets, it'll kind of ring out permanently. So the trick is getting the sweet spot where it's got these dynamics. And you could take a copy of that envelope and go into the FM input, say, and give a little bit of pitch modulation with a sort of decay envelope too. You can get into kick drum territory quite easily this way if you bring the frequency down. Bring the modulation up. Play with the envelope shape a bit. Quite a good kick drum designer. But the noise source in the ADVA is also normal to the FM input, so you can bring in a little bit of noise to the frequency modulation, which gives it a little kind of almost like a snare. And on the ADVA we can also turn on the output distortion, which will kind of shape this from more of a sine to more of a square. You can adjust the output level to reduce the amount of that, but so with ADVA alone, with this noise and distortion, got quite a good range of tones. Let's take that distortion off again. And let's take that noise out again. Let's hit a pitch sequence in. Let's take a copy of the same pitch sequence to the oscillator, which I'm not using. Remember, all the sounds are coming out of ADVA self-oscillating at the moment. But if I take a sine wave output from the oscillator tracking the same sequence as this and go into the FM input, gradually bring up the FM amount and play with the tuning ratio. We've got some more complex FM kind of tones. And I have to admit, I just love these kind of sounds. Great for techno, great for kind of interesting electronic percussion, really. Let's whack the output distortion on again. So this kind of advanced filter pinging, you can get some really great tones out of this. Okay, in this patch I'm going to look at using the internal white noise source to create some filtered percussion sounds. With any other filter you could do this just by feeding white noise into the input, but with ADVA it's a handy built-in white noise source, and I've panned over to that fully. I'm going to use the Jasmine and Olive Trees traffic module here to take 3 different triggers and give me 3 different combinations of 3 CV values, which I can use to kind of sculpt 3 different sounds. And then I'll use a kick drum from the Tip Top 909 module over here. Let's just listen to the 3 sounds that I've got set up. So first of all, on the middle channel here, I've kind of configured a sort of closed hi-hat. So this is just white noise. I've got the first channel or the first row of traffic controlling the decay time of the envelope that is opening the VCA that's built into ADVA. So if I adjust this top pot here, I can control the length of that note or that sound. The middle pot is controlling, or CV output B is controlling the filter type. So that's set to high pass, 12 dB. I could try the different band pass or low pass options, but I think for this sound the high pass is the one that works best. And then the bottom row, or CV output C, is controlling the pitch. I've got that to the FM input with the attenuverter maxed, and yeah, I can just tune it to something approximating a kind of pretty simple white noisy closed hi-hat. And then the right hand channel, very similar. I've just increased the decay time a bit, so I've got more of an open hat sound, and I've tuned it up ever so slightly in relation to the closed. So I can basically play these two different triggers. Yeah, I've got a little bit of resonance up here as well, just to give the sound a little bit of that kind of, little bit of extra high frequency body. And then, yeah, the first channel I have tuned down a bit lower. And I've set the filter mode to band pass 12 dB. That's the 24 dB, which is a bit more murky. And again, I've got a kind of medium decay time, so that's going to act as my snare. And then, yeah, I can kind of sequence those sounds as 3 different drum sounds. So this is all just the white noise through ADVA, switching the filter mode, switching the tuning, and adjusting the release time or the decay time of the envelope that's controlling the VCA, and that's it. Add a kick drum, and you can play with traffic now to kind of play with these decay times. So there you go. Very simple white noise based percussion. Just using ADVA as the only sound source here with a single envelope. Okay, in this patch I'm going to look at using the resonance CV input, which is something you don't always get on a filter, but if you've got voltage control over the resonance you can get some quite interesting effects. Let's start just by recapping that. When you turn the resonance from 0 to full up, the filter will self-oscillate. Get a sine wave. So using the resonance CV input we can automate that. Let's go from the out of the contour 1 that I've just plugged in here, function generator. So if I trigger this, it will rise and fall. Turn that on. If I loop this, it will kind of turn this on and off. Control the shape of the rise and fall with these bend controls here. Now, if I take this into audio rate, we get a nice this interesting AM kind of effect where it's basically turning on and off very, very quickly, which creates some interesting kind of extra harmonics. We can control the initial amount of resonance, which will kind of change the wave a little bit as well. And we can sort of tune in by adjusting the rise and fall time on contour 1, we're changing the frequency. So let's take a pitch CV input. Let's go into the 1 volt per octave. I'm just playing a little arpeggio from the key step here. Let's take that same pitch CV into the rate on contour 1. So these are now tracking together. And let's take an envelope to the internal VCA. So just from the resonance control being self-modulated, I've got nothing at the input of the filter, and I'm not frequency modulating the filter apart from the sequence going to the volt per octave. We've got this quite nice metallic kind of timbre. Playing with the relative frequencies by adjusting these rise and fall times on contour 1. Get some really nice sounds. Now we can go one step further. I'm going to take the inverted output of contour 1 and I'm going to go into the main FM input of the filter. So this oscillator effectively, I'm now going to take an easy attenuverter to bring this down a fraction. So we're getting FM on top of AM with the same modulator, which is much more extreme. But just this function generator and filter gives you an absolutely huge palette of clangy metallic sort of sounds like this. Okay, in this patch I'm going to look at using some audio rate filter frequency modulation to create some kind of formant vocal overtone kind of sounds on top of the filter. It's quite an interesting technique if you use a second oscillator. In this case I've got the Expert Sleeper's Lorelei. I've got the same volt per octave information going into both of them, and I'm taking the sine wave output from Lorelei into the FM input. And yeah, at the moment there's no FM happening, so I've just got the saw wave from the EM129. I've got an envelope from the Danny Sound ADSR over here. I've multed that envelope to the other filter CV input, the volt per octave, but through an attenuator. So I know it's a bit hard to see with all these little things, but basically, yeah, I've got, if I turn the cutoff down a bit more, and I can bring that envelope up. Now, if I start bringing in the filter FM with the collar on the cutoff knob here, bring the frequency down, bring the resonance up a bit, start getting these kind of little throaty so that's adjusting the FM amount. There's a few sweet spots. You can play with the tuning of the modulating oscillator. Try a little sequence. Yeah, it's really good for these kind of guttural, throaty, croaky, gurgling sort of sounds. Really adds a new dimension to the palette. So that's just about it for this video. Hopefully you've been inspired to try some of these patches with your own setup. I want to say a big thanks to Plum Audio for hooking me up with ADVA. I genuinely do think it's one of the best all-round filters I've tried. It sounds great, has loads of handy extras, and in particular that built-in VCA means it's perfect for small systems or live cases. So thanks to you also for watching. If you're not already a subscriber, please consider hitting the button. And if you've enjoyed the video, please leave a like and a comment. It's always great to hear from you. I'll be back soon, so see you next time.